Hi, my name's Leon Brown, and today I'll be talking to yourselves about ADHD, otherly known as Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. We all have obstacles in life growing up, and this is one of the challenges that I've had to face. It's all about getting the support, having the support network around you, having the support network, and dealing with it. It's imperative. This is what the eyes can't see.
Upon getting a diagnosis of ADHD, there's so many things to kind of comprehend and think about. Being an open book to family, being open to friends, and kind of talking about it and finding ways to kind of be open about it, really. And on a personal level, there's kind of so many things that kind of worried me. Number one, talking to my close family, my mom, my dad, my sister, about having something like a diagnosis of ADHD. And for me, as a person that's very prideful, like to keep things to myself, very independent, it was quite a bit of a struggle. And I think more so the impact of how they was going to take it, in me being open about it, how they was going to receive it, and how they was going to react to it. Because as young people, we kind of like to be stiff upper lipped, we like to deal with things ourselves. And for me personally, I was just really worried of how they was going to react to it, and also kind of a judgment kind of impact. And also being from a black and ethnic background, and kind of culturally, there was kind of so many things I was worried about. Were they going to understand what ADHD was, understand how it has affected me and how I'm trying to deal with it? Were they going to blame me, see it as an issue, see me as the problem? And there's just so many things that was kind of going round in my head, round and round, of my worries with having my diagnosis, which to me is something that's very important. And now I have my diagnosis, and kind of thinking about all the different things circling in my head, talking to my family, wanting them to understand. There's a lot to deal with in that factor. Also friends as well, close friends, work colleagues, and just people in my circle outside of my family in general, because there can be a lot of judgment. And like I said, as an independent person and a person that likes to be in control of things and kind of go through my day-to-day life and on my life path as best as I can, the kind of judgment and worrying what people say, how they'll perceive me and what they'll think about me, all those things are a beneficiary kind of important factor with having a diagnosis like ADHD, and kind of a need that's a bit of an additional need that you would say is different to a lot of people. And I would say it is important to try and be strong, try and be open, not worry about judgment, not worry how people perceive it, family members, close family members, friends, because at the end of the day, if they want to be around you, if they want to be a supportive network and they're proper family and proper friends, they will support you, they will understand you, be there to kind of help and kind of be understanding, because understanding is very important with ADHD. And there's other factors surrounding it as well, such as relationships of a romantic nature. A lot of people with ADHD have certain traits and characteristics, like we know, and relationships can be a struggle. I struggle personally with trust. I struggle personally with having relationships, and the relationships I've not had many, but a lot of them don't last very long, because I struggle to trust people, struggle to kind of understand people want to be with me for me. And having ADHD, now I do feel different, I am different, but But if somebody wants to be with you, they'll be with you for you and understand you as an individual. And I feel having ADHD, it's not kind of a barrier. It's something that I've got to embrace when it comes to a relationship, because at the end of the day, if somebody wants to be with you, like I said, they'll be with you for who you are. And it kind of, like I said, is kind of a kind of superhero power, I call it, because now having my diagnosis, I feel like I've got a weight off my shoulders, and hopefully that growing understanding from my family, my close family, and with me not telling them straight away, they don't see it as me hiding it from them and kind of lying to them about me, kind of the different walks I've been through, getting the advice and support, and why I may be how I've been, and trying to kind of be distancing myself away from them with everything that I've had going on. It's been a lot to deal with, but I hope I'm progressively getting their understanding, and anyone that's kind of had a diagnosis or wanting to get a diagnosis, that is part of the journey. Some people may not understand, but in terms of your family, if they're a loving family, they will understand you, they will support you, and never matter much of how it may take or how long it may take for them to kind of understand, for you to be open with them, speak to them about your diagnosis and talk to them about the journey you've had to go on, whether it's included them as a support or you've had to deal with it and try to deal with it on your own, they will be understanding, and they should be understanding. And even when it comes to relationships, friends, or relationships of more personal, romantic nature, boyfriend and girlfriend, husband and wife, and those developmental kind of relationships, if somebody wants to be with you, should accept you for who you are, ADHD or no ADHD, and it's something that everyone kind of needs to understand. It's something that is quite tough to deal with, and it's been tough for me to deal with, but in terms of support, guidance, and people around you, you need that supportive circle, and that's one of the biggest challenges that I've had to kind of face, or felt I needed to kind of battle with on my own, because I just felt kind of not sure whether I wanted to be open about it, not whether I'm not going to get the reassurance of the support and the understanding. And that's quite human. As humans, we like to sometimes keep things to ourselves and keep things to ourselves in the terms of dealing with things, but sometimes it's nice to be open and include people that you feel safe around and have that supportive network around you. So with me conveying this and talking about this, it's important to realise having a diagnosis, going through the diagnosis of having ADHD, there's always that supportive network, and there should be that supportive network. It's about being confident in yourself, dealing with it, not feeling ashamed to have something like ADHD, which I feel is something that is important for you to kind of have close and manage it and deal with it. Nobody's perfect in this world, and having a good family unit, friends around you, and also partners in a relationship sense, they should be supportive as much as possible. And also I feel like it's just one of those things that we all have to deal with. We all face challenges, we all face hurdles in life, and I do feel like providing this kind of conversation, having this conversation, I do feel that people will be able to connect with it, maybe even be able to reach out to people that they thought they couldn't do, and having somebody that's going through it or gone through it and had the kind of support and had the advice and gone on that journey. You don't have to go on it on your own. Be there to kind of embrace it. Feel like you can reach out to people, your friends, your family, they're there as a supporting network. I have had those challenges. I felt that lack of confidence in being able to be open about it. But by having that kind of barrier that I've kind of run over in my head to get my diagnosis, to go through the hurdles with work, to go through the hurdles of not feeling like I'm good enough for people, not feeling like I've got that mainstay in society, wondering where I'm gonna go in life, wondering why I'm meant to be here in life. Everyone goes through things, and having my diagnosis and reflecting on my school upbringing and having those kind of challenges and those traits that I could identify looking back now. But back then I didn't have the support, it wasn't identified, but that's not an issue at all. It's about dealing with it and getting the support when you feel it's most appropriate, and having that support, getting my diagnosis, recognizing it, and hopefully seeing the kind of transformation in myself, and now people opening up their eyes through having conversations, connecting with people, getting that advice, and feeling more freer to accept who I am is very, very important, not just for me, but for everyone else that's going through kind of getting a diagnosis, trying to kind of find ways of getting a diagnosis, because it can be quite challenging in terms of going the GP route and the NHS route. You can be waiting months and months, years and years. But if you feel that you need to get a diagnosis as soon as possible to kind of let people around you understand who you are as an individual with ADHD, or even to convey and get the support you need at work in a working sense. Don't feel like you can't get a private diagnosis. If you've got the money and you've got the kind of financial means there, get your diagnosis, because it can be very beneficial. Supporting networks in work, like I said, supporting structures, additional kind of support at work, and even people around you accepting who you are and kind of changing how they are to support you, because it's important in life. Sometimes we don't like to change who we are kind of to support others or accommodate others, but it's very, very important to kind of work with who you are, embrace who you are. And for me, having ADHD and kind of reaching out to people and doing kind of the things I need to do and get the support, I feel it's a relief. And I know it's going to be something where I'm going to have to learn and develop and accept who I am with the traits and kind of how I am as a person. But for me, it's the best thing I've ever done, getting my diagnosis, having that kind of reflective time as well. So yeah.
Specifically with ADHD, I think there is a big kind of detailing of a lack of empathy. And I'll give you an example. So I work in a college with children and young people, and with my traits related to ADHD, my employer decided that it was becoming an issue, and they just couldn't understand why I was communicating the way I was, and kind of detailing the certain traits within the working environment, and they saw it as an issue. So for me, there is a big pull on employers to understand ADHD, understand how those differences can be a good thing in the working environment. But for myself, it was a very traumatic time communicating with them, trying to get them to understand what ADHD was, how being different is not a bad thing. And it kind of concluded and progressed where they wanted to get me out of the environment. They thought it was too much, and they were saying that it was having an effect on the people within the environment. And for me, it was really traumatic because I love my job, I'm good at my job, I'm good at working with young people, and it was kind of that thing where I didn't understand what I was doing wrong. And for me, I knew I wasn't doing anything wrong. It was them not understanding what ADHD was, wanting to support me and wanting to help me get my diagnosis, get the support within the college setting, and progress as a good staff member. And it got to the stage progressively where they were trying to discriminate against me, get me out of my job, and just kick me out and get somebody else in. And it's been a really traumatic time over the past 6 months. I've had to compile statements, I've had to hand in my diagnosis letters just to kind of prove to them that I'm not a problem. I may have ADHD, but I am different, everyone's different, and that shouldn't be a clause to try and kick me out. And as you can see, I'm talking because I'm quite worked up about it because it's been quite an emotional time. Adding to that, I've not told my mum and dad, I've not told my close family. So I've tried to keep it away from them because also there's that kind of cultural pull where they would probably see as I'm the one with the issue, I'm the one that needs to deal with it, and my employment, I've got nothing that they need to answer for. And I just didn't want to take that risk. So for me now having that closure where they've held their hands up, they've apologized to me, They've said that it won't happen again, they will listen, and if anything happens in the future with somebody else, another staff member, it's kind of a learning tool. And the kind of closure that I've got is knowing that they have discriminated against me, but they've apologised. And the fact that I can now go back to work shortly, get on with my job, and recognise ADHD as a difference, but a good difference, because everyone is different in this world, and I shouldn't be shot down for it. Yes, my traits can be a bit tough to deal with at times, but it's about having that patience, the empathy, the support, and just kind of building on that and kind of educating people. And for me, I said to them, if you're not sure, if you don't know how to kind of support that, then there needs to be a level of training that can kind of help the staff team, help the college environment understand it even more. So for me, I am very open-minded now. I'm kind of a bit more happier, and I seem a bit more happier. But it has been tough over the past 6 months going through the whole process, and it's something that I've had to take time to step back and kind of think about. And like I said, with my family, I'm very close to my family, and I just hope they will understand, and my employer now do understand that I'm not a bad person. I'm not a Tasmanian devil. I have got needs that I've had since I was young, but just weren't diagnosed. And I'm a good asset, and we can move on from this, and I can be a bigger person and a better person for it. Primary school. There was many a times where I'd say things to my classmates that you'd think was not very nice and could hurt somebody, hurt someone's feelings. But for me in primary school, I was very young, very immature, and I just thought it was just me being young. But a lot of things I would do, I'd say to the teachers, say to my classmates, the quite dangerous things I'd do, pushing people, trying to play games that were very dangerous. It wasn't nice. And then moving forward into secondary school, and I can remember being at the back of the class and pulling one of my classmates' chair out, and he fell back and hit his head on the cupboard. I was laughing my head off, and my classmates were laughing, but I could see he was so upset and brought himself to tears. And that was just like the impulsive behaviours that I didn't think what I was doing. But back then, I was very young, and I just thought I could do what I want, and I didn't understand the actions that I was doing. And for me, it was just fun. Everyone was laughing, everyone was smiling. But to my classmates, to the teachers, it wasn't nice. At times, some things were dangerous. Sometimes some of the things were inappropriate. But for me, I just didn't have an understanding. When it comes to understanding and growing up, I do feel there was a lot of misunderstanding, miscommunication, and a lot of the people I was growing up with misinterpreting my actions, the way I behaved in a negative way. And I think without the diagnosis and without getting the support and knowing ADHD was there, I can see where that was apparent. But transitioning, moving forward into adulthood, and now eventually getting the support I've got with my ADHD diagnosis, I feel a lot better. I feel the people around me will understand me a lot more now, be more patient, have more time for me, and not just take everything I say with my behaviours and actions at face value and shoot me down for it. But the most important thing in terms of the close-knit relationship for me is my family, and being able to communicate with them about my ADHD, them understanding it, and with me doing this, my way of explaining it to them, and just explaining everything I've been through. So that's very important for me. because I felt like I really couldn't go to them, be open about it. And now I've gone through this process and doing this, which is very important. Like I said, I feel like they'll be able to understand me. The relationship will be a lot better, and I'll be able to kind of feel more relaxed in terms of communicating with them and just talking a lot more about it. So when it comes to looking at the diagnosis and how to get a diagnosis for ADHD, there's several ways you can go about it. You can get a proper professional consultation through a private practice, or you can go through the GP route and get one done by your GP or by your hospital. But for me, because of my job I do, and sometimes the kind of impact that my traits, now knowing I've got ADHD, had and do have now, I thought to myself, I don't want it to impact my work. I want to be able to get the support I need, and that's why I decided to go and speak to my GP. It was quite an easy process. I spoke to her and I said, I may have got ADHD, I think I've got ADHD, but I need some sort of initial support. So I had some sort of scale assessment where I went through a series of questions, and she said to me, Leon, from the assessment I've done, I really feel that's a potential that you've got ADHD. So me being a proactive person, I decided I can't wait for an assessment through the NHS. I need a private diagnosis. So I looked online at a few consultation places where I could maybe get a private assessment, and I managed to find a consultant in Liverpool that would do me an assessment. It was quite emotional because I said to myself, I've got to pay out this money, but the fact that if I have got it, how important it is, not only for my job, but also for getting that kind of closure that some of the things I do is not just me, and there is a need that I need support with. So I went to Liverpool, got my assessment, and it was known that what I thought, and even reflecting that I didn't get support with growing up through special educational needs support and additional support with school, with everything that was happening to me, the things I was doing, the ADHD was apparent. And for me, and also the people around me and people that will kind of understand where I'm coming from, a private assessment or an assessment via the NHS is there. It's about taking the time, understanding what you need to do some research, speak to people that you feel confident in, and if you're not happy or you feel confident to do it yourself, go and get the support. And that's what I did. Spoke to my GP, couldn't wait for a GP assessment in terms of referral with the time frame that they was giving me, so I went and got a private diagnosis. And for me, it was the most life-changing time in my life where I thought, right, I've got my private assessment and I can move on from this, and I can go to my employer, explain to them that I've got my assessment and seek the support that I need, and also go to my family and listen to what they have to say, and hopefully get the support that they would give me. So that's kind of the two things for me that I would say is important. Knowing what ADHD is, the traits, the signs, and also knowing how you're going to get a diagnosis, the support you need, and having that support network around you to deal with it. And I would say, with my experiences growing up, not knowing why I was acting the way I was, and not knowing whether it was just me being young and I would grow out of it, I feel I was a bit naive, and I feel like at times I didn't get the support from my family with it. Because even now, my family would say to me, Leon, why do you act a certain way? Why do you do these things? And because I've not told them about my diagnosis and getting the support I have done, now knowing I've got ADHD, there's going to be a big, massive weight off my shoulders when I do tell them and when they do watch this back, because it's been a very emotional time for me. And for everyone watching in and kind of watching this kind of process unfold, it's important to sometimes listen, get the advice you need, and you will get the support.
What we know as ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or some people still call it ADD, attention deficit disorder, has been recognized by some doctors since way back in 1902. But from 1902 until 1980, it was all about little boys who couldn't sit still, couldn't shut up, and were driving everybody nuts. It was just behavior problems. The name of the disorder was changed a number of times, and there were different formulations, but it was all about behavior problems. Since 1980, which is when they first changed the name of the disorder to include the words attention deficit, we've realized that this is not so much a behavior problem, but far more a problem with the brain's management system, its executive functions. And we've also learned that there are many people who have ADHD who've never had any significant behavior problems. And that even for those who have, that's usually the least of it. It's the attention problems that tend to make more trouble for people, particularly as they get a little bit older and more is expected of them for being able to manage themselves. One thing that's important to be clear about from the very beginning is that ADHD has nothing to do with how smart a person is. There's some people who have this who are like super smart. Others high average, middle average, low average, slow. I treat people for this who are like university professors and doctors and lawyers and big shots in business. A lot of people who are regular folks. Some people have trouble doing the basics. You can be anything along the IQ spectrum and still have ADHD. It has nothing to do with how smart you are. The other thing to know is that this is a problem, a set of problems, that include a wide range of characteristics. And what I'd like to do today is to describe for you some of the characteristics of what we call ADHD, give some examples of them, and then talk a little bit about what we know about what's involved in the brain in the course of ADHD. One thing that's important is that one of the main things that people with ADHD complain about is they have trouble staying tuned. That when they're listening or reading or working on something, they get part of it, but then it sort of drifts off, and then they're back, and then they drift off, and it drifts off again, and then they're back. They have difficulty staying tuned. It's similar in a way to the problem you have with a cell phone, where you're in an area where you don't have good reception, you can get part of it, and then the message keeps fading in and out. The other thing is that they often have a problem with being distracted. Like anybody else, they see and hear things that are going on around them. They have thoughts going through their head. But most people, if they have something they've got to focus on, can push that stuff out of the way and focus on what they've got to do. People with AD, it's real hard for them to do that. They'll be sitting in a classroom trying to listen to what's going on, or perhaps they'll be in a meeting, or sitting down trying to read something or write something, and somebody drops a pencil and they have to sort of check and see, where did the pencil go? And then they'll be back on task again for a couple of minutes. Then they're thinking about some TV show they saw the night before. Then they're back on task again for a minute, and they're thinking about some conversation they had with somebody 2 hours ago. And then they're back on task again for a few minutes. And then they're looking out the window like anybody else will from time to time, but they're likely to sit and watch the squirrel go up the tree a little longer than somebody else and be checking out the traffic and the cloud formation, the guy who's mowing the lawn. Then they're back on task again for a few minutes. And they'll be thinking about what they're going to do when this is over and how soon is this thing going to be over anyhow. I've got things I've got to do, and what am I going to have for supper tonight, and I wonder what's on TV tonight. All these things are coming in all at one time, and it's almost like you're trying to watch TV and you've got 4 different stations all coming in at the same time on one channel, and it gets kind of hard to separate the signal from the noise. But the things that's puzzling about this, that really makes it very difficult for people to understand, is For people who have ADHD, it's like that almost all the time, but not always. Everybody I've ever seen who has ADD, and that's a lot of people, has a few things they can do where they have no trouble paying attention, no trouble focusing. Let me give you an example. 16-year-old boy I saw, he was the goaltender for his school's ice hockey team. And it just happened that the day his parents brought him in to see me was the day after his team had just won the state championship in ice hockey. So they're bragging a little bit at the beginning about how great he was in the tournament the day before. And apparently he was a very good goalie. They said when he was in the net playing hockey, he missed nothing. He knew where the puck was every second of a fast game, totally on top of it. The kind of goalie every team wants. Smart kid. Tested way high up in the superior range, wanted to get good grades, was hoping to go to medical school, but he was always in trouble with his teachers. And what they say to him is, you know, once in a while you'll say something that shows how smart you are. Well, we'll be talking about something, you'll come in with some comment that's really very perceptive, and it's quite impressive. But most of the time, you're out to lunch, you're looking out the window, you're staring at the ceiling, you look like you're half asleep. Half the time, you don't even know what page we're on. And the question he kept asking him was, if you can pay attention so well when you're playing hockey, how come you can't pay attention when you're sitting in class? Or here's another example. A lot of times parents will bring in kids for me to see, and they say, no, the teacher says this kid can't pay attention for more than 5 minutes. We know that's not true. We have watched her play video games. And she can sit and play those video games for 3 hours at a time and not move. And the teacher said she's easily distracted. That's nonsense. When she's playing those games, she's locked on that screen like a laser, and the only way you're going to get her attention is to jump in her face or turn off the TV. So again, it's like, you can do it here, why can't you do it there? Now, it's not always sports or video games. There's some people with ADD, they're not good at that stuff. They might be into art, and they're sketching and drawing and really getting into it. Somebody else, when they're little, they're creating engineering marvels with Lego blocks. And then when they're older, they're taking car engines apart and putting them back together, or designing computer networks. But everybody I've ever seen who has ADHD has a few things they can do where they have no trouble paying attention, even though on almost everything else, they've got a lot of trouble paying attention. And if you ask them about it, say, what's with this? How come you can do it here, and you can't do it here, here, and here? Usually what they'll say is, it's easy. If it's something I'm interested in, I can pay attention. If not, I can't. And most people hear that and they say, yeah, right, congratulations. That's true for anybody. Anybody's going to pay attention better for something they're interested in than for something they're not, which is true. But here's the difference. People who don't have ADHD, if they've got something they've got to do and they know they've got to do it and it's important, they can usually make themselves pay attention, even if it's pretty boring, just because they know they have to do it. People with ADD, it is incredibly difficult for them to be able to make themselves pay attention, unless the task is something that's really interesting to them, not because somebody told them it ought to be interesting, but just because it is interesting to them for whatever reasons. Or if they feel like they have a gun to their head and something very unpleasant is going to be happening very fast if they don't take care of this right here, right now. Under those two conditions, no problem. They can focus very well. Anything else, it's really difficult for them to focus. But the problem is, this is not something that's under voluntary control. It makes it look like it's a problem with willpower. If you can do it here, why can't you do it here, here, and here? But it's not a problem with willpower. It's a problem with the way the brain is wired. All the characteristics of ADHD, which I'm going to be describing here, are things everybody has trouble with sometimes. It's just people with ADD have a lot more trouble with it. So in that sense, ADHD is not an all or nothing deal like pregnancy. Either you are pregnant or you're not pregnant, and there's nothing in between. It's more like depression, where everybody gets bummed out once in a while, but just because somebody's unhappy for a couple of days doesn't mean we're going to diagnose them as clinically depressed. It's only when those depressive symptoms are persistent and pervasive and making a lot of trouble for me, say, yeah, that's a depression, we ought to do something about it. So all the characteristics of ADHD are problems everybody has sometimes. It's just with people who have ADD, they just have a lot more difficulty with it more of the time. And the problem is, it is not under voluntary control. It's not something you can do with willpower. But let me tell you about some of the other things in which we see with people with ADHD. One is they often have trouble getting organized and getting started on things. For many, it's difficulty organizing their stuff, that their backpack, their desks, their notebooks, their filing system, their living space, bigger mess than most other people most of the time, unless somebody else is helping them take care of it. Other people have no trouble at all with their stuff. They have a lot of trouble with their time and their work. And what they'll tell you is, if I have a bunch of stuff to do at one time, it's really hard for me to look at it and say, okay, that should be first, that should be second, that should be third. But even when they get their priorities straight, which often doesn't happen, they tend to have a lot of difficulty getting started. Another piece of it that you often hear about from people with ADHD is they'll say they have a lot of difficulty in regulating their sleep and their alertness and being able to keep up the effort to finish things in a reasonable time. Many complain that they have trouble getting to sleep, and what they'll tell you is I often stay up a lot later than I really want to or should, because I found if I try to go to bed before I'm really, really exhausted, I just can't shut my head off. I just keep thinking of stuff. And so I stay up late, reading, watching TV, surfing the net or whatever, until I'm just exhausted, then I fall asleep fine. But the problem then is I tend to sleep like a dead person, and I have a hard time resurrecting myself in the morning. And if I don't have somebody around to help me get myself out of bed in the morning, I'm very likely to be late to whatever it is I'm supposed to do, or possibly sleep through the whole thing. I just keep hitting the snooze button or just turn the clock off altogether. During the day, they're usually all right, as long as they're on their feet moving around or talking a lot. But if they have to sit still for very long, to listen or to read or do paperwork, the eyelids start getting kind of heavy. Another thing that often happens as a problem with people with ADHD is they have trouble staying with a task, that they may start it reasonably well, but they have a hard time then keeping up the effort to finish it in a reasonable time. I had a track star from the university, a runner who came into my office one day, and he said, "My mind's a great sprinter, but it's a lousy distance runner." He said, "If the task I have to do is something you do in one quick chunk, you just go all out for it and then you're done with it, I'm fine. But if it's something where you can't do it in one quick chunk, it's a longer-term project, you have to keep chipping away at it day after day, that I have more trouble with. And my approach then is either hurry up, slapdash, get the thing done, or why don't we just set this aside and wait until it becomes a little more of an emergency." Everybody has trouble with deadlines sometimes. People with ADD, it's almost like they can't get started until it's becoming an emergency. Another thing that often persons with ADHD have trouble with is writing. I'm not talking about penmanship now. I'm talking about taking ideas and putting them into sentences and paragraphs. Because what people will say is often, I've got a lot of ideas for what I should write for this essay I'm supposed to write or for this term paper, but it just takes me half a forever to be able to get the sentences and paragraphs put together so they make sense. I'm either changing it or it's just disorganized. They have difficulty organizing their thoughts and being able to get the words out in a reasonable way. Another piece of this, it's not part of the official diagnostic criteria for ADHD, but it's certainly something that a lot of people with ADHD are concerned about and complain about, is that many times they have difficulty managing their emotions. But I need to give you a few examples because it's not the same for everybody. A salesman I saw one time came in and he said, "I was in the diner yesterday, late afternoon, having lunch. I'm in a pretty good mood sitting there eating my sandwich. The guy in the booth behind me gets his sandwich. He's chewing to it loud. He's going chomp, chomp, chomp." He said there was something about that noise was driving me nuts. It was as though a computer virus had gotten into my head and just gobbled up all the space, and that's all I could think about was that noise. I'm sitting with my fist clenched, seriously thinking about getting up and smacking this guy in the mouth because he's chewing so obnoxiously loud. He said I didn't do it. I didn't want to get arrested. But if I'd been at home, I would have been yelling at somebody or walked out of the room. He said that was strange because after a few minutes, he's still making the same noise, but then it didn't bother me anymore. He said stuff like that happens to me a lot. Well, there'll be some little frustration. The kind of thing that most people on a scale of frustration would say, that goes from 0 to 10, would say, that's a 0 or a 1, maybe a 2 at the most. For me, he said, it can be like a 7 or an 8 or a 9. He said, sometimes I make a big fuss about it. Other times I don't say anything, but I feel this surge of anger where I feel like punching somebody or breaking something. And then usually it's over with. But he said it's not always that way. He said, day before that, I'm at the office. I'm walking down the hall. A friend of mine who works in the other department's coming around the corner. He's walking toward me, reading some papers as he's walking. And I hadn't seen him for a long time. So as we approached each other, I stopped and said, "Hey, what's up? How you doing?" I figured we'd stop and chat for a minute. He looks up, says hi, puts his head down, keeps right on walking. He said, now most people would blow it off in a minute and figure he's in a hurry. He's got to get to a meeting or something. We'll talk later. He said, not me. It had been at lunchtime. I got nothing done for the rest of the day. I spent all afternoon thinking to myself, did I do something to annoy him? Or maybe I did something to offend somebody in his department and they're all angry with me. Or maybe I'm just the kind of person nobody likes, so nobody tell me about it, but I couldn't get it out of my head. Other people, it's not like that. They get an idea in their head of something they want to do or something they want to get or something they want to buy. And all of a sudden that wish takes on such strong urgency that the feeling is, I've got to have it now. And it almost doesn't matter how expensive it is or how inconvenient it's going to be for them or for somebody else, or whether they're using time and money now for this that they know they need for something else tomorrow that's more important. There's just this relentless push, and they will keep that up until they get it or they hit a brick wall. But even if they get it, they're not that happy, because usually by then they're off on something else they want. Other people, it's not like that, but they worry a lot. Like a woman talked about how she was driving down the expressway. She's in the left lane. She said, I'm in the left lane. I've got the Jersey barrier to my left, an 18-wheeler truck on my right. We're cruising about 65 miles an hour, and this truck starts to pull over a little bit. He didn't get in my lane. It got me thinking about how big his truck was, how small my car was. And pretty soon I'm thinking to myself, what would happen if he didn't see me? And he pulled over and squished me against the Jersey barrier. And soon, I'm not just thinking about it, I'm running a very vivid movie in my head, imagining exactly what it would look like if that truck came over and smashed into my car, crumpled the car, sharp pieces of metal are sticking into me, I'm bleeding to death, the car's getting dragged along the Jersey barrier, the truck jackknifes, cars and trucks behind us are hitting us repeatedly, there's this massive traffic jam, takes a long time to get the rescue squad out to cut me out of the car. By that time I bled to death. They have to call my family and tell them I'm dead, and all this while I'm trying to drive the car 65 miles an hour down the road. She said stuff like that happens to me all the time. There'll be some little thing, and I think, what would happen if this happened? And everything's going along all right, and I'm thinking, what would happen if this happened, or what would happen if that happened? And pretty soon I'm not just thinking about it, I'm into it. Now, it's not like anybody with ADD has all this stuff, but many will have one or some combination of a couple of them. But what they have in common is that computer virus in the head thing, that the emotion, whether it's the hurt feelings or being annoyed about something, or I've got to have it now, or what would happen if, comes and just sort of gobbles up all the space in their head. And it's very difficult for them to put it in perspective, to put it to the back of their mind and get on with what they've got to do. Another thing that's very important for people with ADHD is their working memory. If you ask folks who have ADHD, how's your memory? Often they'll say, I've got the best memory in my family. I can remember stuff nobody else can remember. And they'll give you some example about some movie they saw 10 years ago, and they can tell you every detail of the entire storyline of the movie they saw once 10 years ago. I haven't seen it since. Or somebody else will say, yeah, I went to the Super Bowl 5 years ago. I can still describe for you almost every play they ran during that game. Or somebody else will say, I've got 450 songs in my head. All the music, all the lyrics, all the verses that were popular back in the 70s. But even though they might be very good about remembering some things like that from a long time ago, if you ask them about something that happened just a couple of minutes ago or yesterday, often they can't tell you. The problem with memory with ADHD is not with long-term storage memory, it's with short-term working memory. It's what you depend on when you go into the other room to get something and you're standing there scratching your head and wondering what in the world you came in here for. Or you're working on a project, you go downstairs, get something you need for the project, see something else that's interesting, or something else that needs doing. Soon you're up to your elbows in project number 2, having totally forgotten you were in the middle of project number 1 upstairs. It was kind of important to get it done. Students complain, they'll be in class. Teacher asks a question, they raise their hand, they've got a good answer for it. Teacher calls on somebody else first. You have to wait while this other kid says her shtick. Then the teacher comes back and says, yeah, what were you going to say? It's like, totally clueless. Not only have I forgotten what I was going to say, but what was the question again? Or they'll read something, they understand it perfectly well at the moment that they read it. They read a few more pages, stop for a second, and realize their eyes have gone over every word, and they haven't got the foggiest idea of what they just read. Or, this really bothers them, they'll study for a test the night before the test. They'll go over it and quiz them, they've got it. They go into class the next day thinking they're going to get a good grade on this, and all of a sudden a big chunk of what they knew the night before has evaporated. Can't pull it out of their head when they need it, but then a few hours, a few days later, something jogs their memory, it's all back again. It's not that they didn't have it, it's they couldn't retrieve it when they needed it. Or you're getting ready to go someplace. You think of 5 things you need to take with you. Half an hour later, you're walking out the door, you got one of them. Can't remember the 4 to save your life. It's where you have to hold one thing in your mind while you're doing something else. That's the kind of memory problem that people with ADHD complain about. Another part of this is managing action. You know, it's certainly true that there are some people who, even as adults, are very restless and antsy. It's like they always have to have some part of them in motion. And there are some who are very quick to jump into things, even as adults. And certainly there are many kids who have this sort of thing. But the fact is, many people with ADHD have difficulty slowing down when they need to slow down and speeding up when they need to speed up. Often they have difficulty in monitoring their actions. They'll sometimes speak out of turn and not take into account what the effects are going to be of talking out and saying what they're saying, or they'll jump into something without thinking about what's going to happen if I do this. But all these things I'm talking about, the problems with memory, the problems with difficulty in controlling actions, the problems with regulating emotions, the problems with regulating alertness and sleep, the problems with being able to focus and shift focus when you need to. All these things constitute the range of difficulties that people with ADHD complain about. And remember, all of these are things everybody has trouble with sometimes. It's just that people with ADD have a lot more trouble with them. So the question is not does it ever happen, but how much does it happen? How much does it interfere with the person's being able to do the things they have to do in their daily life? Now, how does it happen? Why is it that some people have this so much more difficulty with these things than other people do? The evidence shows that it seems to be mostly inherited. Out of every 4 people diagnosed with ADHD, one of them has a mom or dad who's got it, whether they know it or not. They never used to diagnose this very well, and even today it gets missed a lot. The other 3, if they don't have a parent who has it, usually they have a grandparent or an uncle, an aunt, or a cousin or brother or sister, one of their relatives who have it, although often it's not recognized. There are some people who have this where you can see it from early childhood. There's some others where you don't see it much in the early years of their schooling, but then when they begin to move into middle school and they don't have that one teacher who can help to keep things organized for them, now all of a sudden they've got to keep track of what's going on in several different classes and homework for different courses and moving around from one class to another. They have a lot more difficulty managing it. There's some whose parents are so effective in building a scaffolding around them that you don't even see the problem until they get up into high school, where the parents are not that much aware of what they need to do, or they may move out of the house and move off to college or get involved in some work where the parents can't help them, and you begin to see then that they have a lot of trouble organizing themselves and doing what they need to do. So we don't always see this in early childhood. Sometimes it doesn't really appear until adolescence or early adulthood. But the fact is that those are usually the hardest times, I would say probably for most. Middle school, high school, first couple of years of college or going out in the work world, those are the times when most people with ADHD have the most difficulty with it, because those are the times when you have the widest range of tasks you have to do, with the least opportunity to escape from the ones you're not that good at. If you're lucky, as you move on, you can focus more on the things you're good at and let somebody else do the other stuff that you're not that good at. And some people function quite well that way. But the fact is, these are problems that can cause a lot of difficulty, not just in school, but in the way people get along with other members of their family, the way people manage their social relationships, and the way they manage their jobs. And what we need to do is to be able to design a way of helping them to work with their strengths and working around their difficulties. But I think in order to be able to really appreciate this fully, it's important to understand what's going on in the brain that underlies these difficulties which I've just been describing. The brain is about 2.5 pounds, about that big. In there, you've got 100 billion neurons. Those are the cells that make up most of the brain tissue. It's hard for most people to imagine a number as big as 100 billion, but here's a way you can do it. Think about pixels on a TV screen. Imagine a 17-inch TV screen or monitor screen for your computer. On that screen, you'd have about 200,000 pixels. Now, imagine if we then went to the Freedom Tower in New York. It's almost 100 floors high. And take 17-inch monitor screens and set them side by side, bottom to top, all the way up one side, all the way around, so this entire building is totally covered with 17-inch TV sets, and turn them all on, and add up all those pixels on all those screens and that entire huge building. You would then have enough pixels, if you added them all together, to show how many neurons one person has in their brain. Now, these neurons, they're very, very tiny. You have to look at them under a microscope. But they come in different sizes and shapes, but they all work on a branches and twigs system, something like this. And if you isolate any one of them, you'd find that there are over 1,000 places where it's connecting and interacting with the ones around it. But the thing that's amazing about it is the whole system works on low voltage electrical impulses, and it is not wired together for anybody. That's true for those with ADHD. It's true for every one of the rest of us. they are not directly connected. Let me show you what it looks like. If you can imagine these tiny, tiny connections that are so small you need a microscope to see them. Look like a couple of mushroom heads butted up against each other. And then there's a space between them which is thinner than a piece of tissue paper. So when there's something that's coming in from the brain, electrical impulse is traveling along here, it has to jump this gap like a spark plug. And then there are little receptor buttons on the other side here that it has to connect with. And if it comes in strong enough, it goes on to the next connection and moves on from there to wherever it needs to go. If it doesn't, it just fizzles here. But the other thing we have here is there are little bubbles on the side. This is where they're coming from. This is where the chemicals are manufactured. The brain makes 50 different chemicals to help carry messages back and forth. And there are 2 of them that control most of the things that I've been describing in ADHD. So what's happening when that electrical impulse comes is it releases microdots of that chemical. That's what crosses the gap and hits these receptors. It works like a spark plug. And then if it hits the right threshold, it moves on. And then on this side, there's some little cells that work like little vacuum cleaners that go and suck back the chemicals and reload the system. Otherwise, it would be just locked open all the time. We think what happens with people who have ADHD is their brains make these chemicals the same way everybody else's brain does, but they simply do not release and reload them effectively. And the other thing we know is that for 8 out of 10 people who have ADHD, if you give them the right amount of the right medicine, the system can work better. For some, it's huge how much it helps. For others, it's substantial, but it's not huge. For others, it helps a little, but not that much. And 2 out of 10, it doesn't work at all. But the fact is, though this is indeed a chemical problem, the medicines that we have for ADHD cure nothing. It's not like you have a strep throat, you take an antibiotic and it knocks out the infection. It's more like my eyeglasses. I have a problem with my eyes. I can't see well. If I'm looking at typewriter-sized print, it just looks blurry to me. If I put these on, I can read it as well as anybody can. Take them off, I'm right back where I started. The glasses do not fix my eyes. They just help me see when I've got them on. And the same thing is true of the medicines we use for treating ADHD. But it's also important to recognize that medication is just one aspect of the treatment that's important for somebody with ADHD. And there are many ways in which we help people with ADHD by helping them to learn skills, by helping them to use some technology and strategies to be able to deal with whatever they have to deal with in school or on the job or in their family and social relationships. And it's most effective to be able to, first of all, have a very good evaluation to understand exactly which problems with ADHD this particular person has, and then to have the team of, if it's a child, the child and the parent and the doctor in consultation with the educators, the teachers that are working with them, to try to assess what are the strengths of this child. That's our beginning point. What are the difficulties? And what plan can we put together which will allow us to be able to build on those strengths and help the child or the adult learn about ways of dealing more effectively with their difficulties so that they can succeed and reach their full potential.
So this is for everybody watching this. I just want to say, don't feel like you can't speak to anybody. There's people out there that will give you the support, give you the help you need. We're all different. It's a society we live in. Don't feel afraid. Get the support you need. And if you're worried about anything, there's different people out there, different organizations that will provide you with that support. ADHD is not a barrier to life. ADHD is a difference that you should embrace. So get the support you need and be yourself.